when we're in job search, there's a preferred process, and I'm a big fan of it. So leverage your network, right? Leverage your best buds. That's always the best way to go. So you'll never get a complaint from me on that. Or you ask for a warm introduction. Always a beautiful thing, right? And then, or you get some type of a semi-warm introduction. But as a career coach, hey, I'm a big fan of doing these things because, quite honestly, it helps. And but I'm not necessarily a big fan of putting everything into this approach, and I'll explain why in a minute here. So they say, well, so Ed, what's cold calling all about? What's a cold engagement? And the basics is when you start to reach out to someone you don't know. I mean, you don't know them from Adam. You do not know them. There is no warm or semi-warm introduction to anyone. You have had no prior connection with this person. And a cold engagement could take many forms, right? It could be a call, it could be an email, it could be a LinkedIn message, it could be a text. A cold engagement is also when you're at a networking forum or at some industry meeting and you're walking up to somebody that you don't know, right? So cold calling, always gets the high billing because it's a physical, it's a pick up the phone, cell phone, and make a call. But cold engagement can take many forms. But I'm going to focus on cold calling more so this morning. Now, the question is, why do I make a cold call, Ed? I'm just going to say with my buds, I'm going to say with all warm everything, right? And again, here's my reasoning for a cold call. I'm a big fan of tapping into the hidden job market, right? And I give an hour and a half talk on that alone, right? The hidden job market. What is it? But you also have an opportunity to build a direct relationship with the hiring manager that you hope and pray that perhaps it might lead to an interview or a job at some point. You also circumvent the ATS and the recruiters completely. And, if you're going to apply for a job, you do want to get around the ATS system. But in some circumstances, especially when you get older, especially if you have a very vertically driven resume, recruiters are not your friends. I was a recruiter. I know exactly what recruiters do and who my friends were and who my friends were not. But you get to circumvent these folks, right? The other thing that happens with the cold call is that if you ever call somebody who's a hiring manager, a decision maker, and they pick up the phone and they start to engage you, they end up with your resume at some point. Just remember, those folks are not paying a third-party recruiter fee, and you have immediate value to them that could come back to bless you. So these are just four of the many. There are many reasons. Here are the top four that I would argue on why you might want to make a cold call. Now, here are some myths. One myth, hey, it never works. And it takes way too long. Hey, I'm not worthy of making the call. And this is a classic, hey, I can't find the phone number, so therefore I'm going to go back to going to networking meetings and getting leads and getting warm leads because I just can't find the phone numbers. I've heard them all, and they're all myths at one level. The fact that it never works, quite honestly, we're going to kind of dispel why it never works. So let's start with some stats, and a couple of these stats are pretty startling. So one stat that's out there is 28% of cold calls are answered, 55% are not. So when you start thinking about, hey, I'm going to make a cold call, no one will answer the phone, that's wrong. Phone does get answered, more so than not, but not 100%, right? So, and you got to work at it. This next statistic is the one that I think of all the statistics I'm showing you this morning is the one that grabs me the most. A study was done where C-level buyers, VPs, were asked, hey, do you want an email? Do you want, mail? What do you want 57% said, hey, I'm okay with a cold call if it's the right person calling me with the right service, the right solution. Interesting, right? 57%. So that means if you're reaching out to a senior director, a VP, and you're making an argument about who you are, and if you have everything in order, high probability they might take a hard look at you more so than you might ever think. Now at the lower levels, not so much, but at the senior levels, it's pretty high. And I've had a lot of success with people calling at those levels, and I'll give you some examples a little bit later. Here's another one: 11% of voicemails that are left will get a response in that first attempt. So don't think if you don't leave a voicemail, well, hey, I'm not going to leave one because I didn't talk to anybody. But if you leave the right voicemail, you might get a response 11% of the time, right? But if you leave a poor voicemail, and I get calls every day, every single day, and I'll never call those folks back, never, because of the way they leave me a voicemail. So there's a right way and a wrong way. So, David, any questions before I go on?
Not yet in the chat, but folks,
Yep.
Remember, you can certainly just alert us to a question by putting it in chat.
Okay, thanks. So I'll give you some stats for my company. We've coached over 700 clients to date. 40% of those clients have landed because of the hidden job market, right? Not jobs of, not applying for jobs, the hidden job market. But here's the thing: of that, 20% landed based on a cold engagement. So when somebody says it doesn't work, I beg to tell you otherwise. And I have so many successes around this, but that's our metric that we track. Now, warm to cold progression. Here's how it all flows, right? Hey, if you know a person, it's simple, right? Hey, you know somebody, you pick up the phone, you call the person because you know them, they know you, right? The other one is you're introduced by another person, right? That could be a lead. You get a real nice, strong introduction. That's good. But you might know a person indirectly because they're connected to you on LinkedIn. Well, I know them, but it's just been a very short exchange on LinkedIn, but you still know them. Now, you might be allowed to engage a person because you're part of an approved networking industry function. In other words, you're in your lane. You're at a function, whether it be a Zoom call, face-to-face meeting, and it almost kind of gives you that green light that it's okay to engage that person. And then the beautiful thing, right? You're asked to interview with the person. So all these things are all warm. But then what happens is if none of these things take place and that particular company, that particular person is right in your lane and 1 through 5 doesn't exist, what do? Well, that's when you have to make a cold call if you want to get to that person. Now, here I was talking about.
Yeah, we actually now do have 2 questions that came in.
Okay.
John has a question. Can you speak to what makes a good or bad voice message? Any insight on the current trend not to leave a voice message at all?
So let me give you, here's probably we probably made 10,000 calls for clients in the last 10 years, 11 years. And what you never want to do is leave a voicemail and say, hey, my name's John Smith. Hey, I'm in job transition, right? I'm looking for a job, right? You never want to go there. You want to you have to make an argument in terms of, they have to know your name, they have to know who you are, but you have to make an argument. And your argument is not going to be based on your job description, but your argument's going to be based on something of value. So I'm a big fan of leaving a voicemail and then putting something of value where you've done something that could resonate with the person you're leaving the voicemail with, and then you could go explain a little bit more in terms of why you're calling. And where the mistake is made sometimes, when we jump right to, hey, I'm a job transition, or we talk about our job description. Hey, I'm a controller. This is where I've worked most recently. But you never really get at your value proposition, which is things that you've accomplished. And you got to do it tight, and you got to practice it. So, David, that would be my short answer on that question.
Terrific, and I agree it should be short, so that's a terrific idea. And Jeff has a question. Assuming you do not get through on your first or second or third attempt, how often should you call? Daily, weekly, monthly?
Yeah, so later on I'm going to talk about that. But I think we've used a standard of about 9 calls over a 40-day period. And then at that point, you go to plan B. There is a point where you can go to plan B. But what you never, ever do, right, is you never leave multiple voicemails day after day. You have to give people breathing room, and you have to also make sure you're not calling on the same day, leaving the same voicemail at the same time, every 4 days, right? So you really have to mix it up, and you have to be somewhat creative. But that would be the statistic or the standard we've used. I'll talk a little bit more about that, David.
Great, thank you.
All right. Now let me talk about principles of cold calling. So and these principles, when you don't use them, you get yourself in trouble right out of the gate. So here's the first one. You have to target the right person. And this takes time. I have clients right now where, we have to take some time to figure out who that best person is to call. If you're a director, you don't call the CEO. If you're the director, you don't call another peer who's a director. If you're a director, you don't call somebody, in a different department. You need to call the person that most likely you would work for at that firm. So taking the time to find the person takes some time. I mean, you have to do that well. A lot of times what will happen is, hey, I made a call into the company. And they say, well, who'd you call? Well, I called the recruiter. I would rather see you go outside and throw marshmallows against the side of your house. That would be a better use of your time than ever making a cold call to an internal recruiter. Not a fan of that at all. So get to the hiring manager. Now, the next one is you have a right to call certain people, and you've earned that right. Now, for everybody on this call, if you were in job transition, just call the person that you've earned the right to call. Don't make it inappropriate. So I use the analogy, right, of Gary Cooper earned the right to call John Wayne. Then I got yelled at a month ago, say, hey, Ed, who's Gary Cooper? And I said, okay. I said, all right, so Matt Damon has the right to call Tom Cruise. How's that? So everybody on this call, when you get to a certain point in your career, you've been bloodied. You have scars of experience. You've earned the right to be able to make a call to somebody. And if that person is offended, too bad. You've earned the right to be at that dance, to make that call. A lot of times it becomes, some people will look at me and say, I don't know, I'm going to call this person. And I'm saying, well, you've already earned the right to call the person, right? Now, the next person, or the next one is a recruiter, HR, a third-party recruiter. None of these people will ever have the right to tell you can't call a hiring manager. There's a large pharmaceutical firm, this is years ago. The person was the director, vice president, whatever he was. He actually told me on the phone, you don't have a right, you do not have the right to call a hiring manager in my company. And it was like, you have to be kidding me. I go, you couldn't be more wrong. And I know what he was trying to do. He thought he was on some power trip, thinking that he had the power to tell anybody that no, that's our policy. You can't call anybody. Scrap any recruiter, internal recruiter, anybody who tells you that you can't call a hiring manager to introduce yourself, to build a relationship. Just get that out of your thought. But here's the other thing. Here's number 4, and this is again where we make a big mistake. Build a relationship with the phone call when you're making a cold call. Don't ask for the job. Build a relationship. See, when you're making a cold call, they don't know you from anybody. You have to kind of introduce yourself. You have to kind of let them get to know you a little bit, build it, and let the relationship kind of proceed from that. When we don't chase the relationship first, most of the time the cold calling may not end well. So these are 4 principles that you really need to rally around as a starting point. All right, let me continue. So let me talk about 11 best practices that have worked really well for our clients over the years. So one is you have to have an A resume. And you could have the best cold call. Hey, send me the resume, and it could fall flat if the resume is not strong. I'm not talking about an A resume. I'm not talking about a B resume. And I give talks on resumes, as some of you might know, all the time. I'm going to give a talk, I guess, next Monday in Great Careers on resume best practices. But that resume has to be an A resume. So it's kind of like, going to a gunfight with a water pistol. It will fail. The other thing is that a great LinkedIn profile, same for Twitter. The recent studies in the last 2 or 3 months, you have a shell LinkedIn, and then you have, an okay LinkedIn. The difference between okay and a great LinkedIn profile will have you looked at 8 times greater than anybody else. And I'm telling you, if you don't have a great link, if you're on this call, you don't have a great LinkedIn profile, you're just like shooting yourself in the foot right now if you're in job transition. That's how important it is. Because sometimes you'll leave a voicemail with someone, they may not see your resume, but they may jump to your LinkedIn profile. And that LinkedIn profile is so-so, or it's inconsistent with the voicemail you left. It's a non-starter. Now, number 3, you have to have a script. I talked about it a few minutes ago. Remember, your job description is not a script. It's always a classic mistake. Hey, I'm a controller from, AstraZeneca, and this is what I've done, right? And the next person calls up, I'm a controller, and this is what I've done. If you don't differentiate yourself with value, you're going to get yourself in trouble. I'm a big fan of writing scripts, practicing it and practicing it. Don't wing it. But you also have to be very careful you're not reading it, right? There's a big difference, right? Don't read it, or that's just as bad. Now, you almost have to have 2 versions of a script. One version is, hey, I'm going to leave a voicemail. They're not going to be there, right? But then all of a sudden they answer the phone. Hey, this is Sue. Yeah, hey, what do you want? Yeah, I'm busy. What do you want? Well, what are you going to say? Right? You have to have 2 versions. And a lot of times when the hiring manager answers the phone, whether he or she answers the phone, don't get nervous. And everybody does, but what happens, you get nervous. Well, look, I just lost my job and I'm in job transition, and this is why I'm calling. And again, that's what you don't want to do. You still got to kind of keep your cool, and you still got to explain to them where your value proposition is, even when they answer that phone. Now, number 5 sounds so simple. I've had clients practice leaving a voicemail, 20 times before they actually do the first one. Now, there's a point where practice, set it aside and just start doing it. And look, this is hard. I've had many clients sit in my office, and we actually made the calls together. I actually coached them right there and then. Because if you're not used to calling somebody that you don't know, you got to practice it. I can just tell you, number 5, my clients who have practiced it have always done better than ones who are just winging it. That's just the fact. Now here's number 6, use voice inflection. So if you're leaving a voicemail, don't sound like you're reading the obituary column from the newspaper to somebody. You have to show energy. You have to show some enthusiasm. If you're over 60 years old, you better show some enthusiasm and some energy. And if you're 40-year-old, you better show some energy and enthusiasm. the most important thing is not monotone, right? The whole thing. Hey, let me tell you something I did. That's okay, right? Now, I mentioned this earlier, a big fan, minimum's 5, maximum 9, 30, 40-day periods, spread them out. Here's some other interesting stats, and these are our stats. Although I think one of them was confirmed. I did some research, but avoid Mondays. Mondays aren't a good time to make the call. Monday through Friday, 8 a.m., 11:45. I've had some of our best success at 11:45 and at 4 p.m. I don't know what it is around 11:45, but people are getting ready to go to lunch. They're waiting for a noon phone call. I don't know what it is, but that's what I would recommend. I'm not a fan of leaving more than 3 voicemails. There might be a long one, might be a shorter one, might be a Hail Mary one. But once you left that third and final voicemail, get pretty aggressive. And here's one other point that I always encourage people to do. You leave you do a cold call, first voicemail, have high energy, right? Second voicemail, have even higher energy. Your last voicemail is even the highest energy, and it could be more of a Hail Mary. I've had some clients about 4 years ago. It was just an amazing thing to see. The final voicemail, the Hail Mary voicemail, got, I want to say, a 70% callback. And what the Hail Mary is, hey, Sue, I know you've heard, hopefully you've heard a couple of my voicemails. I'm not going to call you again. This is my last note to you. But here's one reason why I really wanted to talk to you. It's amazing how you say it triggers something in people. You always want to call in a quiet place. Make sure cell phone reception is great. There are people that leave me voicemails who are trying to cold call me. Noise in the background, dogs barking, you name it, just horrible, and I can't even hear what they're saying. The chance of me calling them back is 0. Make sure you don't put yourself in that situation. Now, here's one that could get you in big trouble. When you're leaving a voicemail and you're not sure of the phone prompts, do not make a mistake that people make. You start to leave a voicemail, halfway through it, you sneeze. Halfway through it, you're coughing. You said the wrong thing. And whatever you don't want to do is say, shoot. And then you hit the pound sign on the phone, message sent. Now you got a cleanup mess on your hands. So if you make a mistake on a voicemail, as you're leaving a voicemail, I'm sorry, excuse me, as I was saying, you keep it going and finish strong. Then hit the pound key. And if the message is sent, it's sent, but at least you've corrected yourself. But if you hit the pound key and it says, would you like to re-record? Guess what you get to do? Re-record, right? So any questions on these 11 best practices before I go on?
So folks, this is an opportunity. If you'd like, let us know that you have a question. You can check with Ed right now if there's any on these 11 best. Nothing was posted in the chat, Ed, but it could be that they were listening to your 11 best practices.
Okay, very good.
So, but if there are, well, I'll simply say, excuse me, and we'll move forward.
Now, I'm going to go to 2 different flows here.
Oh, there is a question just before, just in time, from Jean. Do you have a script?
Yeah, that's why people hire me.
Oh, okay.
Great question.
But I guess that's what your suggestion is to.
Yeah, and scripts will be different for each person too. I'm giving you the broad, what the basis of what a script needs to look like, but each person will be a little bit different too. So they do need to be customized. So this worst to best case, and this is what people tend to not, this is like the not the good list, right? You make a cold call, the person picks up the phone, they hang up on you before you even start talking, whereas right in the middle of your sentence, click. That's probably that's hard to get through. And I've had people hang up on me on a Wednesday. I call them back on Friday. Hey Ed, what's going on? Hey, listen, the next thing you know, my candidate was going in for an interview. So even on hang-ups, if you got tough skin, give it one more shot. If they hang up on you a second time, then I'd be less excited about calling a third time. But everybody has a bad day. That's the worst thing that could happen to you, right? Now, the second worst thing that happens is, what do you want? Why are you calling me? And you got to keep your cool. And hey, look, you know, I'm from Jersey. There are some people in Jersey that I've made calls to. They say just that. What do you want? Now, if I call somebody in Texas, hey Ed, what's going on? How can I help you? Different parts of the country, depending on the clients I'm working with, we'll have it's a little bit harder, a little bit easier. But even in Texas, people would be courteous. You better have value, and you better know what you're talking about, or that call ends fairly quickly too. So don't get me wrong. And for those people who want to kind of get right to the point, they get to the point. And if you get to the point quickly with the same spirit, then somebody from New Jersey will end up talking to you no different than somebody in Texas, but you got to approach it a little bit differently. If somebody ever says to you, why are you not, well, let me go back to number 2. If the person truly is rude, nasty, mean, that's also an indicator to you that you may never want to go work for this person, right? It's a beautiful thing. A cold call brings out either the best in people or the worst in people. It's amazing when they answer the phone. Why are you not calling HR? Number 3 is basically nothing more than a brush off. Or somebody's a really, really weak leader. Because when I was in corporate America, I was always looking for great talent. And nobody had to, you know, from HR had to introduce me to people. Number 4, hey, thanks for calling. I have no openings. You'll get that. Number 5, you know, it's like, hey, let me transfer you over to HR. A little bit like number 3. Number 6, hey, look, I'm just too busy. I don't have time. Sorry, you know, call me back, or, you know, can't talk to you. Bye. Now, somebody else might tell you, hey, let's call me back tomorrow. Now, number 8 is where it gets a little bit better. Hey, I don't have anything now, but feel free to keep in touch. Now we're going to see how it gets a little bit better now. So number 9, I don't have any openings, but I know someone you should talk to. You know, let's connect on LinkedIn. In other words, you get more of a, they see you, they hear you, you gave them something of value. It was the way you approached that cold call. They kind of like what you said. Now, number 10, hey, I'm tied up now. Can you call me back tomorrow at 8:30? Now, if they say, if they're tied up, hey, please call me back, that's when you say, can I call you back at 8:30 tomorrow? Now, number 11, this is where it gets interesting, right? Thanks for calling. So, hey, so what's up? How can I help you? That's a person who's just taking their time. There's a lot of good people out there. Not everybody's is to the point where they can't take a phone call ever or talk to anybody that they don't know. Now, number 12, I have a few minutes. Tell me about yourself. What are you looking for? In fact, that topic of tell me about yourself, I'm going to be speaking on that next month somewhere in New Jersey on that topic alone. That's how important that topic is. That's an hour discussion all by itself. Because if you get that wrong, again, your cold call will crash land horribly. In fact, if you get that wrong during an interview, your interview could crash horribly. Now, number 13 has happened to so many of my clients over the years. Perfect timing. My controller just resigned. Can you send me your resume now? perfect timing. We're firing all 3 of our directors on confidence, and I'm having interviews off-site. Send me your resume. But see, you'll never get to perfect timing if you never make the phone call, because you're waiting for someone to introduce you to this person via a warm lead. 14, let me get you to our recruiter to start the process. That's not handing you off to HR, that's handing you off to start the process. And number 15 is pretty cool, right? Number 15 is you give it enough about you. Hey, let's get together. And then how that happens, it doesn't matter how it happens, just move forward to get together. A lot of times when you're making these phone calls, right, and this is another mistake, what you never do is say, do you have a job description? Because you're not even at that point yet. If they want to get together with you because you're tapping into the hidden job market, that usually means you're meeting a need that they have or a problem that they need to get solved. Let the conversation continue. That will eventually lead to that job or job description, but don't ever press the job description, because this is a relationship being born out of nothing. That's what cold calls are all about, right? You go from nothing to something. Let me give you a few more stats. So if you reach out to somebody, it's been proven 1 to 2 touch points, less than 5% chance that you're even getting a look, right? Now, if you get up to 5 touch points, 50% chance that they'll know your name and you're getting some kind of a look. You get the 9 touch points, I promise you, 75% chance you're getting a solid look and somebody's making a yes or no decision of whether they want to engage you. And number 4, I've talked about, 9 calls over a 40-day period. But I hear this a lot. Hey, Ed, I made a cold call. I made 3 of them this week. No one called me back. It doesn't work. And I'll go back to best practices. There's a lot of work that has to go into this. Cold calling is not just picking up the phone and calling somebody, right? There's a lot that goes into it. That part is not a myth in terms of the preparation if you want to be successful at it.
Oh, excuse me, Ed.
Yeah.
So there's a question from John. Is this approach you are suggesting applicable to email as well? How do we ferret out phone numbers in this age of privacy focus?
Well, there's a you can certainly use email. The problem with email is that it's just one way of reaching out to someone. I'm a big fan of doing multiple things. Email's one, making the phone call is imperative. Sometimes you send an email to somebody, they get 100 emails. I mean, when I was doing corporate HR, when I was the head of recruiting for a multi-billion-dollar division, I got so many phone calls in a day that if I returned them all, I would get no work done. So I didn't return any of them. Now, if somebody sent me an email, I might take a glance at the email, and if it resonated with me, this person's left me a voicemail. So there's this thing that in my mind becomes important, that do more than one approach. Many times you leave a voicemail to a hiring manager, then the hiring manager goes back and finds the email. Sometimes you send an email, they'll do nothing unless you call them. Because look, if you're a Gary Cooper calling John Wayne, what are you afraid of? Right? What are you afraid of? And that's always my point to my clients. Don't be afraid of anything. You've earned the right to make the phone call.
Thank you.
Hey, look,
Kathy has a question. Sorry.
I'm just going to make a point. When I'm working with people who are the head of marketing, really amazing salespeople, those people I'm a little bit, I show less mercy to. If you're a rock star salesperson and you're afraid to call the very person as a salesperson that you're going to go work for to go sell, millions of dollars worth of equipment to, what does that say to the hiring manager? So when you're in sales, my onus on you, gets ratcheted up quite a bit. So sorry, David, what were you going to ask?
So Kathy has a question. Thank you. Kathy has a question. What are touch points?
Oh, touch points really are, when you're calling someone, and let me give you an example. I worked a few years back. I worked with somebody who was a scientist. He got let go, and and he had a lot of patents, and he's fairly well known. But what happened was I was teaching him how to pick up the phone and make a phone call. So what he did is that he picked up the phone, he called someone, and a touch point in this particular case was my client was the southeastern U.S. Kayak Association president. The person he was calling was the National Kayak Association president. What do you think I asked him to do when he introduced himself on that voicemail? See, touch points can take many forms. I've had touch points hit on alumni. Touch points can hit on schools that people went to. Hey, my spouse, my significant other actually attended. My son's attending the very school you went to. But it has to be a significant touch point. It can't be something trivial like, oh, I see, we're connected to 400 mutual people on LinkedIn. Nothing trivial. Or I see that we're a member of the same LinkedIn group. Nothing trivial. It has to be something of meaning. But if you could do a little bit of a touch point, oh, it's a beautiful thing, because then they know that you've done a little bit of research on them. And that simple touch point may spark a relationship. So that would be my answer, David.
Great, thank you. And Jim has a question. So is it okay to first send an email and then follow up with a phone call, i.e. using the email as an introduction?
Yep, I'm a big fan of that if you can, but always face it. Do not, whatever you do, send an email on Monday in the morning and then call them in the afternoon. Hey, I sent you an email. You got to give hiring managers, I usually say 3 or 4 days. You can spread it apart. You can also make the phone call first and then follow it up with the email. Either direction works. But I'm not as much of a fan as some other career coaches and doing the LinkedIn connection request and doing the drip, what's known as the drip campaign. I'm not a big dripper, if you will, and I don't do it as a practice to market my business. It drives me crazy, and there are people that teach it, and some of the drip campaigns are even automated. Oh, it drives me crazy, but I don't recommend it.
Thank you.
Okay. So here's a couple of more stats. Just remember, when you're making that cold call, you're only going to get 5 minutes. You're only going to get 5 minutes, and that's the average. Don't think you're going to have longer than that, although I'm going to give you an example in a little bit where it went way longer than that. Now, here's something you never do. Hey, did I catch you at a bad time? The Gong group basically said, when you say that, 40% less likely you're going to go anywhere with that cold call. Yeah, you did catch me at a bad time. Call me tomorrow. I got to go. Bye. You have to make the assumption you're catching them at a good time, but don't bring that up at all. That's my recommendation. Now, number 3, if I was to leave you with any statistic worth anything in this entire presentation this morning, I'm going to tell you this is the one that you got to write down. 82% of B2B decision makers think that callers are unprepared. In other words, you're making a cold call, you don't have your act together. 82% say that. And then less likely you're going to have any kind of success. See, it goes back to, are you prepared to put some effort into this? And if you are, then there's a whole series of work you got to do with somebody like me to get to a point where you want to then make that call. If you don't want to put the time in, then you could join the gang that says cold calls don't work.
Oh, excuse
Now,
me.
yeah.
So John has a question. What is a drip campaign?
Oh, drip campaign. Somebody came up with this amazing notion. And I apologize. If there's a career coach on the call and you're a big fan of drip campaigns, I apologize. But a drip campaign is when you send a LinkedIn note. Hey, I'd like to connect with you. I see we're in the same field. All right, 3 days later, you send them a note. Hey, what kind of, I see that you work for this one company. Here's something that I've done with that company. Just wanted you to know. 3 days later, hey, would it be okay if I sent you my resume to take a look at? 3 days later, you send them another, so what the drip campaign is, you're inching your way towards what you really want that person to do with you. And I'm not a fan of it. Look, when I was in corporate America, I had some pretty, I was a CFO. I was pressed for time like no tomorrow. If someone's going to reach out to me, make it your best case, send me your resume, give me an argument. I don't have time for 5, 6, 7 messages dripping to me. That my patience would run very thin, and I would just disengage from you. So I'm probably more the approach, David, around give me your best shot out of the gate. And if it resonates, it's done well, I'm going to give you a good look, and then I'll make a decision. But don't drip me to death. I also think dripping is disingenuous because what you're doing, you're trying to manipulate me through these little baby messages, thinking that's going to build a relationship with me. And look, I've heard the other argument of why you want to do a drip campaign, but I don't buy it. So, not that I don't have a strong opinion about this, David.
Thank you.
Now, there is one exception on cold calling, and if I look at all my clients today, I could probably count maybe not even on 10 fingers where people can't do it. I had a client in New York a couple of years ago. I had one in Philly a couple of years ago. Had one 3 years ago. Had one 11 years ago. And the one 11, 12 years ago, this is a person who would be asked to go in front of the board of a major pharmaceutical firm, multi-billion-dollar firm. He was just a top everything in that world. But if asking this person to call up the president of another pharmaceutical firm to introduce himself, he could not do it. He would actually physically get ill. And I actually had to make the calls on his behalf, not as a recruiter, but as a career coach, right? Now I have somebody else who in New York City, amazing person. But she said to me, Ed, I physically can't do it. I cannot do it. And I had one person out west said, hey, Ed, my heart races to a point where I might have a heart attack if I do this. So you have to understand, as hard as I am in terms of trying to strike a balance, I'm never going to ask a client of mine to die because they're going to try to or go to the hospital and making a cold call. But what I don't want you to do is, and I had a person, a couple of people kind of almost lie to me. They're not willing to make the cold call because they're not willing to put the time in, but they certainly have the ability to do it, and they want it easy. Well, easy is applying for jobs. Easy is only looking for warm leads all the time. That's easier. This is hard. So I don't want you to think, the people on the call, that, hey, if you really get you to a point where you physically can't do it, then I'm okay with making an exception. But it always seems, in my world at least, the people that couldn't do it are the ones that needed to do it the most, because what's happened in their careers, they found themselves in really deep verticals of what they do, where recruiters are not their friends, and that this method is the way that's probably going to open up the door in a relationship. And that's been kind of the sad thing for at least the ones that have made this exception. So let me close with some success stories. So here's one. Person made a phone call to the president of a firm in New Jersey. Yep, in New Jersey. Did exactly what I asked him to do. The president, the CEO of the company, called my client back and said, I'm going to tell you something. I've been doing this for 25 years. The only people ever call me as a recruiter. You're the only person that's ever had the guts to call me and leave me a really succinct, strong voicemail. That's the only reason I'm calling you back. Long story short, met with the CEO, came back a second time, met with the executive team. They actually created a role for him called Director of Customer Service. There was no job opening at all. True story, still working there. Here's another one, lab supervisor. He ended up calling up not the president, but the COO of the company. He left, cold call. Well, long story short, ended up in an interview, ended up with a job offer. The COO didn't make the job offer. It was the president who made the job offer. My client actually went to the office of the president, and he actually held the job offer in front of him and said, so before I hand you this job offer, who's representing you? He asked 3 times, and my client said, me. I'm representing me. No one else is representing me. He goes, well, I've been doing this for a long time. I've never seen anybody do what you did without being represented by a recruiter where I had to pay a damn fee. And he handed him the job offer. He's still working there. Well over the age of 60, by the way, when he did this. Here's another one, Senior VP of Marketing. This was fairly recent. Everything was done well, everything. Reached out to the CMO for a multi-billion-dollar firm on the West Coast. The CMO actually answered the phone. Remember that 64%? Answered the phone. They ended up talking for 45 minutes. My client ended up flying out to this firm on the West Coast, a couple states over, interviewed with the executive team. They're actually creating a job for her as we speak. Fairly recent. Now this one is really interesting one. Number 4, this was a person, he made his very first call. And instead of calling, there was, this division had a CFO, the director of finance, who this position would normally report to, was open. So he went right to the CFO, who was kind of the acting director of finance. So he took a chance. Well, he was so nervous. He actually said to the CFO, answered the phone, and he was so nervous. He goes, "Hey, look, this is the first time I've ever done this in my entire life, and I'm pretty nervous." And the CFO said, "Hey, just relax. Tell me a little bit about yourself." They talked for 30 minutes. It resulted in, no interview, no anything. Guess who gets a phone call 2 months later? My client, from that very CFO. We have 2 financial analyst openings we're posting on Monday. Will you please apply? Are you still available? Will you apply? Not only did he apply, he ended up getting the job at that firm, and he's there right now working. So, and I could talk all morning long, 4 or 5 hours on examples like this, where cold calling can work, but you got to work at it. It's not easy. And it's not, and again, it's 20% success. So why make a phone call? You get to the hidden job market, you get to build relationships, you get to circumvent the ATS and recruiters, you save them money because they're not paying a recruiting fee. Like the example I just showed you, that president said, hey, I've always had to pay a recruiting fee. I'm a big fan of a balanced job search, balancing your job search, putting all your eggs in one strategy not such a fan of.